Dr. Vernon Wolfe holds a degree, a doctorate in psychotherapy, a bachelor's of science in physics and chemistry. He is director of the Institute of Psycho-Maturation and is currently serving on the Congressional Committee of Problems of the Aging. He is past president of the Utah County Mental Health Board, a recipient of the President's Award of the Utah County Medical Health Board, and winner of the Outstanding Contribution to Mental Health Award from the Utah County Mental Health Board. I give you, after a long delay, Dr. Vernon Wolfe.
I'll come up here where you can hear me. It's good to be here. It reminds me, you know, I think that the perspective that we take on medicine and in life reminds me of the story of the two doctors that were coming home late. And one was just really intrepid about it. He didn't want to come home late. The other guy says, "What's the problem?" And he says, "Every time I get home late, my wife just gives me what for about an hour. She doesn't want me coming home late." He says, "Well, what approach are you using?" He says, "Well, I'm really careful. You know, I turn the car off about a half a block away from home. I glide quietly into the driveway. I've gotten so careful I don't even open the door of the car. I slide out the window with my shoes off. I go through the back door and it's all oiled and doesn't squeak. I strip my clothes down there and I go up the stairs on all fours. I know where every creak is. You know, I get to the bedroom door and I've got it oiled, and I go in and I crawl across the floor and I slip under the sheets. And no sooner do I lay down just quietly than she wakes right up and she just gives me what for?" And the other guy says, "Well, it's your approach. It's all your approach." He says, "What do you do?" He says, "When I come home late, I screech around the corner, I scream into the driveway, put my brakes on, even bump the house a little bit. And I stomp up the front door, I open it and I slam it shut, I stomp upstairs, I kick in the bedroom door and I say, 'Anybody here want to make love?' And I never hear a thing." So I have a feeling it's all in our approach, isn't it? Now, we've heard a lot of things in the conference so far, and some of them have been just absolutely fascinating, and there isn't anything that I can disagree with. I think there's a great approach that we're taking towards medicine and all that, but I would like to now take another approach, and it may feel like I'm stomping in your door, but nevertheless, I think, after having studied all kinds of illness and different kinds of problems, and they send me all the unsolvables, and have now for some number of years, there's just a possibility that all of the electromagnetic wave functions of the body are connected to a causal potency holodynamic image system within the brain. I'd like to talk about that for a little while, just a little different approach. Now, let me give you a little background on that, if I may, because I think with all the exciting breakthroughs that we have in science and the integrative work, and I think the World Research Foundation and all the World Health movements are wonderful in this, because they give us an interaction arena. And they get so that we can see all the different perspectives and begin to put them together in an integrative process. But have you ever looked at how you look at things? You realize that the perspective that you're using will determine your outcome. Now, my view tends to be a little different, but what I've done is I've taken it from the viewpoint of what is the behavior of the creature called the human being, especially the human mind. And I have been fascinated by the human mind for a number of years now. And it all began back when I was teaching psychotherapy and religion at Brigham Young University in Utah. And it was in the late 60s, and I found a lot of kids in the neighborhood and in the area that were on drugs, and nobody believed it. And we live in a happy valley up there that's wonderful. So I went down in my spare time and each evening, and I would work with the kids on drugs, and finally we started holding these little meetings. And we started with a little group of about 7 kids. They called themselves, believe it or not, the Repentant Sinners Motorcycle Club. And I dressed just like I dress now, and they were all in hippie clothes, and I mean dressed to the hilt, you know, in the culture. And they let me sit with them, and I learned their language. Within 6 months, we had 400 to 600 kids come into those meetings, and we had begun a series of processes. From that, we organized a half a dozen drug rehabilitation centers, and I went full-time into that. And what I found, I finished my PhD in psychotherapy, and what I found was that there was literally no mind model by which you could bring people who had burned their minds out on LSD and so forth back into a normal mentality, whatever that is. And so I began to work with them, and I began to research very seriously the different... I was trained in my psychotherapy degree in systems analysis of psychotherapy systems of thought. It's one of the things they did for me. And so what I did is I began to take all the psychotherapy systems, and I put them on a chart, and I began to look at the patterns of thought that were being expressed by the psychotherapists or the writers like Freud and Jung and so forth. They went through Dreikers, Adler, all of them, all of the major systems, and to see what their message really was about the human mind itself, about how our minds create our pathologies and our normalities and all those kinds of things. And it was fun. But I couldn't get a mind model. I couldn't find enough. There are a lot of descriptions of how behavior works, but literally there were no real mind models. No models of, you know, like a map on what you do in this case and what you do in that case. So I said, okay, I have a master's in religion. What I will do is I will take all the... I used to teach world religions and the honors science and religion classes at the Y and things like that. And so I said, what happens if we take all of the religious histories and doctrines and philosophies throughout all of history and put those up on the chart? So I did that. About this time, my wife thought my circuits were going to be overloaded. I was walking around with this chart in my mind all the time, doing these comparisons, and my circuitry became overloaded, in a sense, and I kept going. I refused to give up. I said, no, I'm going to find out what this really says. And I was reading prolifically about this time, reviewing everything, making sure I didn't miss anything. 4 or 5 books a week and about 100 articles, and I hired a researcher to hand me all the articles relating to any particular subject, and it was great. And after a while, I said, okay, I can't see it here either. There are wonderful correlations. In fact, the psychotherapy and religious and philosophy correlations became very exciting, almost addictive. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to go deeper. I'm going to look for... I discovered something, really, in all of this, that the mind is a mathematically pure instrument. And so, working on that assumption, I then began to look at mathematics to see if something out of my physics and mathematics background couldn't help me with the problem. Because how to get a mind model was my problem. My stated objective, and I refused to back off from it. And then I found about 4 models. They were all 2-dimensional models on the mind in mathematics, and that didn't help much. So I went then to quantum physics. When I got into quantum physics, I began to discover some wonderful things about how the human mind may function. Made the application of quantum physics to mentality. And when I got into that, then I picked up an article one day on topology and its application to the human heart. And they could predict when fibrillations would take place in the electromagnetic field. And they'd used a topology, a branch of mathematics. It's simple. It's the branch they use for topological maps. You know how to make a 3-dimensional mountain into a 2-dimensional model. And they use it in aerodynamics and in it's computerized. You know, they use it in computers all the time. And you can take a car and you can change its shape and so forth aerodynamically by the use of topology without changing its function. So if you were to take any phenomenon, you can change it. It's like taking light and putting it through a prism and you get the rainbow. Well, you can take with topology anything that's physical or any dimension and change its domain, and you leave its function the same. And I thought, what would happen if we took topology and created a new model of the mind? My mind started going crazy. It took all these charts that I had that just almost were random, and I was desperately trying to find some pattern out of this thing, and it all of a sudden put it into a pattern. And a topological model came into mind. I'd like to share that model with you. Okay? Let's do the slides, shall we? Amazingly simple this became. Most of us Oh, I got it here. Okay. Thank you. Most of us were raised in a society that taught that the world experience that we have is taken, put into a black box called the mind, and then out comes response. Mostly a behavior modification approach, right? So what I did is said, okay, if we want a shape for the mind, why don't we take this black box and use that as our shape? So that's what we did. We took a look at the black box. We opened the black box up. And what came out was a mathematical model. Now, this is just a first thrust at this. This is no revolutionary thing, but this is a tool that I have used now and tested on literally thousands of cases. And this tool is the best tool that I have found in my repertoire of psychotherapy and psychological skills. I'd like to share it with you. Let's just take it and we'll break it into its various parts. It looks a little complicated to you, but it's really very simple. Let's go to the next. Well, I guess I'm the guy that runs this thing. Okay. What I did is I said, okay, if we take the box and make it empty to start with when we're first born, and then we say, okay, what's the first kind of patterning that is programmed into your mind? And that turns out to be what they call your family belief systems. And there's just thousands of books written about family belief systems and transgenerational patterns. And so I said, okay, what is that? Can you tell me what it is? Let's just hear you say, what do you think of? Let's look at your minds for a second. What do you think of when you think of family belief systems? Watch how common this is. Your religion? Your mommy and daddy, sure. Your language? Your attitudes about sex? That's the first one everybody said in unison. Your attitudes just about everything, almost, aren't they? Aren't they contained there? Just think about that. So what I said is, well, where is this programmed? Now, I don't know where it's found in the mind. I'm going to leave that up to some genius in this audience to find that out. But I believe that when your mind takes in, I can see this, when your mind takes in it's the light, the pictures, the sound, all your senses, you know that it changes it into electromagnetic waves. You know that they have a coding system that goes through the... I've heard the best descriptions of that in this conference I've ever heard in my life. Some wonderful minds have come together that describe how that system works. What happens to build your memory banks then? How do you do that? I would like to suggest to you that that is done by holodynamics. It's a holographic, living holographic system in the brain itself. Now, I don't know how that connection is made, but I can sense it's there because I know how to access those ego states. I call them ego states, those holodynamic images. And when you get to them, they're the programs that program most of your behavior. I think they're very, very small, like 10 to the minus 72, I believe, if I read Bohm correctly, and this is quantum physics, and that's why I had to go into quantum physics to find them, to find an explanation for them. And you can contain approximately 1 trillion bits of information in 10 to the minus 72 cubic centimeters of the brain structure itself. Okay? It's something like that, to that magnitude, but we can't measure that yet. It's hypothetical. But somewhere in here, you start out and you start programming your family belief systems, and the brain starts it programming in. It's a wonderful growing process. And all through here, it starts programming it in, and you can just see the little child in his mind. And this is a topological representation. So you can take whatever it is and say, okay, it's represented on that blue shaded part, okay? And as you go through your life, your mind programs more and more of it. And as you get towards the end of your life, if your family belief systems are particularly successful, it will contain, if they're not successful, or if in fact there's some disruptive traumatic experience in your life, and then it has less of a proportion of your mental activity for that. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, so we just represented it topologically. Now, anybody got any questions on that? I just soon discuss this as we go along and make sure you understand what I'm saying, okay? Any questions? Is it clear? Yeah, about half of it. And I figured that about half of it, from what we look at and from the patterns that seem to come out, about half of your mental activity is programmed by your family belief system. So it's mathematically proportioned. There's a great deal of depth behind this, but it doesn't show up in an hour's presentation. Yes. Go ahead. Oh, yes. I don't know that it can be cleared out, but it can be matured up See, some of the things we have are traumatic family events where our little childhood terrors and so forth. I'll explain this a little more as we go along, but boogeyman's under the rugs or under the bed and things like that, or molestation or abuse, those kinds of things are programmed in there, and then they form into causal, what Sperry called in 1978 causal potency. He won that Nobel Prize for this hierarchy of learning in the mind, and what he said was that the energy of the brain comes through and forms causal potency units. And then these causal potency units begin firing mechanisms in the brain. Well, that's what causes thought. Well, I've taken that a little further and said, okay, I believe that these holodynamic images, like if you think of Grandma, now everybody in here think of Grandma for a minute. Can you see Grandma? Now, can you think of the impact of Grandma all through your life? Now, can you go back and think of Grandma's hands? And can you see Grandma's hands? Do you see how your mind works? Isn't that wonderful? Because you went down into a holodynamic image, and you could see it just as plain as anything. You see it in 3D, you see it in color. How many of you see it in color? How many of you don't see in color? See, there's a way to access your color thing and tune it into that if you want to tune your TV set, see, up here. But we'll talk about that a little later. But those images are, in fact, complete images of what you've experienced out here. They can be. So they're programmed in there, yes? Sorry, I will. I'll repeat the questions. He's saying, is this line time? This one's time. It's also the stages of development. There's a series of things that it duplicates because it's a multidimensional model. But yes, for now, this is time. And the blue section is the amount of space actually in your brain topologically that's programmed, okay? Symbolic, of course. Yes? We assume that the 0, starting point is the time of birth. Yes, and when we take people back through regression, age regression, and reliving experiences, and we take them back into the womb and before that, the mind also contains that information, and in quantum physics, they have one of the best explanations that I've ever heard. And that is you just in that kind of dimension go into what Bohm calls the unmanifest dimension, which has access to all, past, present, and future, the everywhere, every when dimension. I'm going to show you how to get to that if you'd like, because we take people there all the time, back and forth. It's a wonderful thing to do. Yes? Yeah, the mind is a different thing. The mind is what the brain, the organ of the brain is one thing. The mind is something entirely different. And when you look at it from different levels of maturation, you see a different mind. I want to go through that a little bit later. Okay? Okay, here we go. Not too many questions. All right, hang on. We'll get some more questions later. Let me show you the rest of this, okay? There's another dimension of programming. I didn't quite know what to do with this, so we just took it all together and called it socio-cultural programming. And so you have all your things like your first day at school. Can you remember what that was like? Can you see your first grade teacher? What's the first teacher you remember? Like my grade 3 one that was just really an aggressive teacher. Threw me across the chair, you know, I'll never forget that. Strapped me for jumping out the window and I was just having fun. You ever have any of those kinds of experiences? So you program these then in this part of your mind, topologically. And then your mind does a wonderful thing. And by the way, this would be all of your social, your peer groups, your churches, all of the things outside of your family belief systems. And we made them different because we think that the mind actually puts them in a different set of images. Then what it does is it correlates. So you'll notice here are your cultural and your cultural belief systems, and here are your family belief systems, and this area here in between is what we call the comfort zone. And most of you will understand what your comfort zones are. That's when everybody believes what you believe. And if we were Nayars in the Indian jungle and we were out there doing our thing, all of us guys would be out there dressed in loincloths with the little spears and bows and arrows, and we'd play our war games and wouldn't hurt anybody very often, but we'd have lots of fun. Meanwhile, the women are at home. They raise the children, handle the animals, handle the building and all those kinds of things of the huts, and they have their own matriarchal society. Once in a while, the men will come home. Each woman has about, it sounds familiar, doesn't it? See if this next part sounds familiar. Each woman has about 7 or 8 husbands and at least that many more lovers. Does that sound familiar? That sounds good. Where is this again? Yes. Anyway, that's their comfort zone. They have a word for it, Nishnishku, I think that's how you pronounce it, and it means God's chosen way. So the human mind then takes whatever it's comfortable with, forms a comfortable position on it, gets a lot of people to birds of a feather kind of coagulate together. You call it homeopathy or something like that. And you get this really good comfort zone. And then you think, God has said it so. And you divinize it. And so do I. So don't we have all these wonderful little divine comfort zones? Then we wonder why, the Ayatollah Khomeini doesn't agree with mine. So that's your comfort zone. Does everybody understand that one? All right? And see, as you go through life, then your comfort zone is basically where you function. There are some capabilities of the human mind to cross over and take what we call a quantum leap and get beyond that. We'll explain that as we go along. Now, another dimension of the mind model is what we've taken from Piaget and Kohlberg's work on the stages of development of the mind. If you correlate this with the philosophical perspectives of the world in all of our known history, also if you correlate it with most of the psychiatric and psychological dimensions, and also Zen Buddhism and all the religious philosophies of the world, you will find an amazing correlation. I can't find almost any concept that won't fit into the general dimensions that we've put here. Whatever your system is, you know that the mind matures, that you start out at a more primitive level than you end up with, we hope. You do, anyway. That's the general trend. So here are the stages of development, and tomorrow in the seminar we will go through these, give you some charts on these, and have these all written out. But let me just give you a brief description of what these are, okay? This first stage here represents that portion of your mind which in its control center thinks in physical dimensions. It handles your biochemistry. It handles your autonomic nervous system. It handles all of the things, your heartbeat, your respiratory system, and so forth. It does it for you, basically. But it also is your physical well-being. It's in charge of it. So if you are ill, then my suggestion is that something in this part of your mind, the ego states involved, have given out signals to your body to be ill. And I know that because each time that illness occurs, we can get into those ego states, we can find it, mature them up, change the signal, and the symptom of the illness disappears. And that's occurred with AIDS and cancer and a whole series of things, and I don't know how it works. I just know it works. I wish somebody would help us figure out how this works. So the second thing, then, does everybody understand that one's physical? Okay, there's no ego even involved here in the person yet. This is the little baby who is just a physical autonomic system, knows how to suck and has the sucking reflex and so forth. And this is the part of the mind that controls it, sometimes called the reptilian mind and so forth. There's all kinds of labels for these in different perspectives. Let's go to the second one. Stage 2, you discover you're a self. And that's a different kind of control center in these holodynamic images within the mind. Okay? Here are the ego states. I call these images ego states because that's basically what they come closest to that I can figure out. These ego states will tell you what you're like. So if you have low self-esteem problems, if you were told, hey, stupid, when you drop the butter, or if you were told you can't succeed in school, if you were given these programs, your mind classifies them and puts them into an area where it can handle all of your self-esteem dimensions. You follow that one? This is your concept of self. Now, usually the person who's at this stage of development is self-centered. Kohlberg and Piaget both called this the self-centered stage. Because the mind here says, I've got this world figured out. It's like the little 2-year-old, they call the terrible twos, stands in the middle of the kitchen floor and says, all right, I know what this world's all about. You guys are all out there to serve me. It's also the business partner that comes into your business, takes all the money and runs with it, and says, well, it was just what it was made for. You were a tree ready to be plucked, right? Okay? Now, let's go to the third one, because once you discover that you are a self and you begin to develop all those wonderful self-esteem things, your mind then discovers there are other selves. And it's just a natural transition. You come to know yourself a little bit. Before you know it, you're looking at somebody else and saying, hey, he's just like me. I bit him, he bit me back. I wonder if he's another me. So you reach out and you begin to relate to other people. And you really feel they are other people, not just slaves serving your self-centered interest. And the difference is, have you ever been on a date with somebody that really is a friend and is there for you? versus the other kind of self-centered date that says, hey, baby, all I want is your lips. You know, that kind of thing. Did you get that? There's a difference. The mentality of this level is different than the mentality of this level. Now, I'm applying this to the general public. Would you like me to apply it to the doctor's situation? Have you ever had a self-centered patient? Nobody in here has ever had one, right? Who comes in, wants all your services for nothing, and then sues you. Or you've got the other kind of doctor. This one, Kohlberg and Piaget both called this the pleaser mode, because your first attempt to relate to other persons is try to match their images, and hoping they'll match yours. They call it the pleaser. Yes, dear. Yes, dear. You ever have a pleaser patient come in? Yes, doctor. Anything you say, doctor? That's because they want you to make them better, right? And have you ever been the pleaser kind of doctor? Yes, whatever you'd like. Oh, yes, I'll just serve you any way you'd like, hoping you'll pay me. It's that kind of mentality. That's a different kind of mentality than the next one. As the mind learns to connect, it learns to really connect. And this is where the third mind is vital. As we've looked at this thing over the years, I've discovered that really the people who are involved in this stage of maturation are attempting to connect with others in a real way. They want to be there. And this is where the mind develops a structure in order to connect with others in a real way. So it develops the discipline, it develops the rational order for itself, and so we sometimes call that the rational well-being mind. And of course, this one that deals with your self-esteem would be the emotional well-being mind. So far we've got physical, emotional, and now rational. While the next mind is the social mind. And here's where you get tired of having no images here at level 1, having just self-centered images at level 2, or trying to find a way to please somebody at level 3. So you shift up into saying what is right. This is when you go to the experts who represent systems of thought which can tell you what is right. Isn't that logical? So they go to the doctor. Or you come to a convention. Or you go to who else? Who else have you got in your society that tells you what is right? The preachers. Anybody else? Lawyers. My mother. No, mother's down here. Actually, when you're into the intimate relationships, mothers represent just an intimate relationship. But when you're representing a system, then you represent the thought patterns of that system. And that's the difference. The mind deals differently with intimate relationships than it deals with systems. That's why you can come to a convention, you can have a great time, and then you have to go home again. See? And you can be just wonderful at the office, and everybody can just think, oh, you're such a marvelous doctor. What can I do for you now? Yes, sir, I'll do exactly what you say. Of course, you got the downdraft of that, where the idiots don't even know how to fill out the forms. But, you know, you get these polarizations, right? Anyway, that's different. Then you go home. See, that's the system. You can be God in the hospital, but when you go back home, the giant at work becomes a dwarf. The kids all rebel against you. Nobody goes like this. You can't understand why the wife doesn't sterilize all the dishes either. You know, it's those kind of fun things. Level 4, then, is a systems mind. It deals with things, see? And so if you take, for instance, the system that you have as homeopathic doctors, as people interested in holistic health, you're sick. I want you to know the system's sick. You don't even have a disciplinary process. That's why the AMA is coming after each one of you. Did you know that? I mean, it's so clear. Just look at it as a system. You got an undisciplined system, so somebody's going to discipline it for you. You're like a teenager out of control. You're killing thousands of people. You ever heard this? This is what the AMA believes, see? If you switch back to the other side of this, they're going to take care of you. They're like parents coming down on you, see? Just a systems problem. Get a disciplinary board. Anyway, but you keep fighting on an individual basis, you'll get kicked out of the house, just like a teenager would. Same system. See, it's a mental process we're using. We're so new, we don't understand that what we've got is the applications of quantum physics to medicine. It's one of the greatest things that have ever happened. It only make a great preacher. Anyway, we'll get back to the mental systems involved in this. I have a lot of feeling about this because I think we're really on a track that's great. So come up here to level 5, okay? What happens at level 5 is a quantum leap, because it says, I am homeopathy. I am a holistic system. I own it. I own the things we're not doing as a unit. It's the I am process. It's a principled mind. That's what Kohlberg calls it. It's a principled mind. So I look at what is really happening in my life, I look at the principles involved, and my mind becomes focused in a new way. Let me show you an easy way to remember that. Here's a kid. You see a kid at level 2 that's in love. What does a self-centered person say about love? Love me. I need love. Right? So you got the kid he's going, and then he finds another kid. Believe it or not, that's how most people get married. Two amoebas trying to find... And it gets mindless. It does. It's just about mindless. I remember walking down the stairs once, and I got some kids, and I stepped over one of them. You know, they teenagers sprawl all over the steps just where you walk, so you walk around them. I did a few things. Nothing was said on the phone. Nothing. Came back up. Still, 5 minutes. Nothing said. Walk upstairs. I say, oh, I'm just going to find out what's going on. It must be a tremendous conversation on the other end. Nothing. They were listening to each other breathe. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful stage, isn't it? And don't you feel that way sometimes in your own practice? You look at this patient and you say, I think I'll just breathe for a while. Mindless. Your mind just goes into stage 3, and that's stage 3, see? I forgot where I was. Anyway, by the time you get to level 5, you begin to own it, and you say, I am love. Oh, by the way, let's go through stage 4 on love. That's kind of fun. If you get to stage 4 on love, I'm going to love the way the minister tells me to love. I'm going to love the way the book tells me to love. So you're getting ready for your honeymoon, you know, and you're reading everything you can find. Or maybe you've read it a long time before then, but anyway. So you try to take the book into your honeymoon. Have you ever tried to do that? See? That's why they say working at it won't work. So anyway, you get this level 4 mentality about love, but here the person realizes, hey, I am love. And that's a different mind. And that same mentality says, okay, I am holistic medicine. It's me. And what happens in this whole program is up to me. And if I don't make it happen, it's not going to happen. So what do I want to have happen? And you become a self-actualized, what Maslow calls a self-actualized person. This is where the self is empowered, that the full potential of yourself begins to come fully. Okay, and that's a different mind. Y'all see that difference? And then there's another mind beyond that. Maybe some beyond that, but if you want to know about those, just go there. Get there first. Because when you get to this next mind, it is the we are mind. I'm not alone in my holistic health approach. There's a lot of us. So why don't we become one mind? And wouldn't it be great to be able to switch into that one mind and deal with health at the level that sickness is? Because we certainly are a sick society, so don't you think that we could catch health just like we catch sickness? And it's possible. You can catch health by becoming healthy and then relating to others in a healthy way. But when you go to work in the morning, and it's Monday morning, and you think, oh my gosh, here comes Mrs. Jones. I don't know what to do with her. Let's put her on another machine. Thank God for the machines. And all of a sudden, you know, Mrs. Jones gets sicker. And furthermore, so do you. And sickness is catching. You probably get what she's got. Find your immunization. So you go home and you put yourself on the machines hoping to jack yourself up. I noticed that some people were saying, oh, these guys have all brought their machines, and when they're down a little bit here, they just go, and they're up again, you know. Do you ever think that what's causing you to go down? How can you possibly be down about anything in this life? This world is perfect. You just don't believe it is. You believe in hardship. You think things are hard. How many think things are hard? Oh, we got an enlightened group. 3. How many of you are lying? That's what I thought. Okay. The 6th mind knows that this world is perfect. It's the we are mind. It's the we are life. We are the world. It's that whole concept. And when you get into that mentality, you have a new kind of mind. Everybody got these 6 levels? Okay? Now let's go to the next one, because the mind is a marvelous thing. Not only does it go through stages of development, but then it takes those stages of development and correlates it with everything you've learned. So what happens is, these 6 stages of development then are correlated with your family belief systems and your cultural belief systems. Now here's the interesting thing. When Larry Colbert and his boys went all over the world in 80 different countries and they started measuring people, they have a coding system for this. I did my PhD on this, and I became a coder for them. And what happens is they find that most people are at level 2, 3, and 4. So this mind model reflects the research that's been done on that. And when you go into dictatorship countries, they can't even find anybody over level 4. Can you tell why? You see that if you're a dictator, you give out the law. And this is the law-oriented mind, according to Kohlberg and Piaget. That's where the mind begins. It's like a kid learning the rules. Have you ever gone out and watched kids play kick the can in the street? You'll find them always talking about the rules. You can do this and you can't do this. You know, at that stage, they're at the 4th level. And of course, there are no organizations in America that are fighting over that same thing. We just get bigger and tell the age of the boys by the size of their toys. And so we're all making the same rules, and as countries, we've now gone into an infantile mentality again, as we, do all the things that the Iks do. There's a society of Iks in Uganda that they forced out of a nomad formation because they said, okay, we're going to, a nomad society. They were hunters and nomads. And the Uganda government took over their nomad land and said, you can't hunt here anymore. You got to become domesticized, domesticized, anyway. And so what they did is they all rebelled, and they became inwardly bound. And so they went into their mind right down to self-centered level and to level 1. And you look at the anthropological descriptions of their society, they stand at the doorway and hurl insults at each other all day. The only time they laugh, it's true, the only time they laugh is when one of their neighbors has a real hardship occur, something tragic. They really laugh if it's really tragic. They defecate on each other's doorsteps. They abandon their children as soon as they can walk. They steal food from their children and their old people. They're absolutely self-centered and deprived. And everybody in the society turned that way. Now, how would you like the rest of our world to be that way? So what do we do about that? There's a way to handle that, because I believe that cities do that to each other now. And governments do it to each other. And so when will we come to a time when collectively as a society we make this transition? In a dictatorship country it's very difficult, because I think the mentality there is, I am the benevolent lawgiver, you must obey my law. If you disregard my law, it's off with your head or out to Siberia, even if it's a collective dictatorship. But in the mind model, you can see that as the minds mature collectively, they will come to take responsibility, and I think that's where democracy comes in, and then they will collectively become a unified society that accepts everybody in their society, even the allopathic doctors. And the AMA and the IRS and Medicaid and Medicare and all those other organizations that are out to get me. You see, if you believe they're out to get you, you're at a level of mentality that's projecting. What level would that be? That's the 2nd level of mentality. You're into your self-centeredness, and so you're projecting these holodynamic images out on others, and guess what? They get the message. And they'll come to get you. And as long as you keep blaming them and projecting, it's just like when you focus on the faults of your spouse. Have you noticed that when you see your spouse in a way that says, look at all the faults of my spouse, what keeps showing up? All the faults. If you focus on bills, what do you get? Lots more bills. So what would happen, I wonder, if we focused on the we are, and we became that one mind in healing the world? That's a level 6 mind, okay? Let's go to the next slide. Let's look at the whole model again. You can begin to see it take shape now. Let's talk about this little plane right down here. It's called the bonding plane. In the bonding plane, what we did is we divided the mind into 2. This part here is the rational part of the mind, and this part here represents the intuitive. we found that almost universally the human mind has two processes by which to handle things. It can handle it in a rational process or an intuitive process. And it takes a balance of both to make a whole mind. Now, some of us have become more left-brained oriented or more rationally oriented. It's not really the left brain, actually it's a whole unit. But Sperry did make the split on the schizophrenics and the epileptics and found that, that the epilepsy would stop, and that then he found that he had a two-brained person. That's because the brain is holodynamic, I believe. And so what is known to the part is known to the whole. I haven't really explained holodynamics. Let me just take a second and do that. If Roy Curtin were up here, he could probably do it 10 times better than me as a nuclear physicist. But suppose if we just take a pond for a minute, and say this circle that I'm making on the board represents a pond, okay? And we drop two stones into it, plop, plop. Well, immediately, can you see what happens in the pond? The ripples go out and form concentric circles around each other. If we froze the pond, took the ice, broke the ice, took any piece of the ice, and shone a laser beam through it, a unified light source, you could see the picture of the whole pond, all its ripples, and the ghosts of the two stones dropping into it. That's called a hologram. Now, if they take a laser beam and they were to take a picture of us like they do in Disneyland, you take a picture and then you shine it down, you break the beam into three parts and you shine it down, you can reproduce in a medium a ghost-looking figure of whatever you took the picture of. So you can look into a window and you can see these ghosts in there talking, yet you can see through them. You wonder, how do they do that? They do it with holographics. The mind works in a holographics, only the mind's holographics are living. So I call them holodynamics. And they are holodynamic units that think in 3D, and they become living entities. I want you to know that I know that these little things are living, and that they have power, and that they, when you get the habit of loving like Grandma loved, that takes power in your mind, and whenever you're going to love, you call on this little holodynamic image, and you love that way. Okay? Now, to store those holodynamics, we needed a topological representation. So we took this plane and we said, okay, we'll put all the images on this plane. We just needed a place for them. Turned out a pretty good place, because you can store any number of images on this plane, and it's like a holographic plate. What is known to the part is known to the whole. So if you send a message to one part of any holodynamic image, all parts seem to know it. Just like if you put the laser beam through any piece of the ice, you can reproduce the whole picture. Or if you put it in a holographic plate, any piece of the plate will produce the whole picture. It's a new concept for some, but nevertheless, it's just holographics. So the mind then creates a plate, and it doesn't look like this, but it's somewhere in there, and it creates a series of holodynamic images I call ego states. So Grandma's up there running around. When she's at level 2, now I'll show you the next one, how this works. When she's at level 2, all the images you have of her are correlated in your brain here at level 2 along this plane. So all the self-centered people that you've ever known in your life and all the things dealing with your esteem are contained in the community of ego states on that plane. Whereas all the transcendent masters that you have in your life and all those wonderful, wise physicians that you have modeled your life after, the healers in your life, the wonderful, warm people who developed your desire to help heal, are up in this area someplace. Okay? Whereas all your level 4 people are down here. You see that? And the mind correlates that. All right? Next slide. Here's the good news and the bad news. This is what we call your passion wave or your interest wave. And what happens is your mind creates interest in different subjects. Well, let's take a look at why. When that wave goes through your mind, it goes through like a wave on a beach. It just goes choom, choom, like this, see, diagrammatically in this topological model. And this wave is actually controlled by the ego states. Your peak performance will be controlled by the ego states on the bonding plane right there. So you will only be able to have a peak performance as high as your ego states will allow you. If you come from a family that's impotent, you're in trouble, because your ego states probably will pass that on to you. I learned that early in the drug rehabilitation program, because we found that we could take a kid who's on drugs, bring him out of his family, rehabilitate him, and the family would create another drug abuser before we could get that done. And so, it's same with alcoholics. Lots of documented studies on that. How you get a problematic child, same in schizophrenic families, takes about 3 to 6 generations to produce a good schizophrenic. And if you treat them as individuals, you won't get hardly anywhere. Notice how they treat them as individuals. They fill up good slots everywhere. $55,000 a year for your budget and no improvement. And the fact is, you could take most schizophrenics and heal them in a very short time by teaching them like Carl Whitaker does at the Schizophrenic Center in Wisconsin. And I think it's Wisconsin, isn't it, where Carl is? And he treats them 3 generations, won't even see a schizophrenic without being 3 generations present. And it's really obvious why. These holodynamic images are passed on from one generation to another. I would like to know if they do that genetically. They're small enough to be passed on genetically, if they reproduce themselves, whether the past lives of people have actually come down genetically, or whether they are accessed through the unmanifest dimension and you have access to any number of them. I don't know, that's a great question though, don't you think? Anyway, back to this. As this wave goes through, this wave is like sex, for instance. Sometimes you're really interested in sex, and sometimes it's nya-nya. Like one week I had a patient come in, a couple come in, and the guy was, he was gay, and he had no sexual interest in his wife, and she was just looked like Marilyn Monroe. She was sensuous and sensual and voluptuous and wonderful, gorgeous girl, and he had no interest in her at all, sexually. He was a good friend, but there was no sex. And they wanted to solve this problem. Same week I had a guy come into therapy, and he worked at Geneva Steel up there, and he was just a great hustling stud, you know, 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. And if he didn't get it, he was just outraged. And there was no way to cross-pollinate them, you know. But see, the one guy's sexual little interest wave would go blip a little bit here, and the other guy's was going like a tidal wave 3 times a day. And that's the passion of the mind. Now, can you think of some of the things that you are impassioned by? So you can tell what's happening here? Where's your passion? No passion in this crowd. Art? How many of you have a passion for art? Isn't it great? I visit all the art museums and everything. It's wonderful. I have that passion. How about music? Ooh, see, can you feel your passion for music? And how about sex? Nobody. Okay. No, but see, all those kinds of things, your family and religion and, you know, law and whatever you have a passion for, and healing. Most of you have a passion for learning, right? So this goes through. Now, here's what happens. Oh, sorry. I've got to do one thing here first. You don't see any of this. What happens is it rises to the surface, and on the surface we diagrammatically said, okay, if a person's acting down here at level 1, we'll put a little area here and call it a cluster of behavior. So a cluster of behavior comes out of this, and it can shift. That's the good news. And so here's a typical cluster. Person gets angry. Can you see what level this would be? Level 2. And so it gets angry, then you get hurt, then you withdraw, then you get depressed, then you go into self-destruction. Nobody ever had those either, right? Or you go into high control, high expectations, attack and blaming. All of them. Now, do you want to handle those? Those are all controlled by these holodynamic ego states within your mind. If you mature up the ego states, that same life energy seems to be able to go into anger becomes caring. Why? Because anger is a primitive form of caring. And hurt becomes sensitivity and so forth. There's a way to make the transition as you move up. See, and so here's the yellow dot, and as it moves up, it shifts. And so your cluster of behavior can shift. And there is the key to psychotherapy. And so what we do with people who are perverts and murderers and rapists and so forth is we simply go down into the ego states where those people reside. If they have illness, chronic illness of any kind, you can go into the ego states that are causing that particular behavior, and by maturing up the ego states, the symptoms disappear. Example, had a lady call me. I'm frantic about this is about 12 years ago. It's one of the first cases and one of the hardest cases. I almost didn't think this would work. But a lady called me and said, my daughter's fallen in love with a multiple rapist murderer. Save her, save her. I said, well, I'll take a look at it. So I called the girl in, and she was in love with this guy. He was still in prison. So I went to the prison, began to do therapy with him. He had never confessed his crimes. Finally, he said to me, yeah, I did them. So I said, okay, let's see how you did them. She was there, so we put her into the role, got her in the car, put her in the position, almost killed her right there. I had to physically stop it. This guy's getting out in 2 weeks. I looked at that, and I stopped him, and then we took that, we matured it up, we did a whole series of things on it, we clustered the whole works, I showed him the process, showed her how to work with him. They began this process, matured that guy's mind up. His hearing was in 2 weeks. 2 days before the hearing, the ex-husband of the girl, she was married to a guy who was fairly brutal, and then had divorced him because of his physical brutality. They had 2 lovely little daughters. Now, can you imagine if your daughter had 2 grandchildren of yours and was going to marry a multiple rapist murderer? How would you feel? So we matured all that up. 2 days before the hearing, the ex-husband is going to go to the hearing, the Board of Parole, and he's going to object to him getting out. His plane blows up, kills him 2 days before he goes. The guy was out at the time. He's getting out on weekends, see? I began to get suspicious. I applied to go, to just tell them what my fears were. They wouldn't let me. They gagged me. First time I've ever had, and the only time I've ever had a gag order. I thought, all right, I hear it. Something coming out of the cosmos here. So I backed off. I said, I'll watch this. Do you know that 3 years later, I got a call from the mother-in-law, the same lady that had called me originally. She says, I don't know what you did, but he is the best son-in-law, the best husband to my daughter, and the best father to those children that I could ever imagine. That was the one I didn't have faith in. I could go on and on. Sexual pervert, molesting little children, okay? Comes into my office. He's living with 5 children and their parents. He's been in prison twice and is just so tempted to molest them, but they all love him so much and have no idea of his history. And so he's playing with these kids every day, and he comes in and he says, Doc, you got to help me. What would you do with him? You give me a machine that works, will you? Besides a razor blade. No, so I said to him, okay, let's take a look at it. Now, I'm going to give you a demonstration. We'll do this tomorrow in the seminar. We'll demonstrate this in you. You as the living subjects. We'll teach you how to go to that 6th mind, how to identify those ego states, and how to mature them from their immature state up to their mature state. Here's this guy. So I put him on the couch, and I say, let's go on a little mind journey. We'll go down and we'll find this, whatever this is that's causing it. So we take him down to this level, and he gets down right to his level 1, and all of a sudden he starts going like this. And I'll demonstrate this for you if I... He starts going like this. Ah, 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 like that on the couch. Now, I found that interesting. I said, what is it? He says, it's a little dwarf, and he's got a great big penis, and he's got it around my neck, and he's choking me to death. Well, is that weird or what? Well, this is how these ego states work. They're absolutely outrageous. And so I said, all right, let's talk to him. I said, you won't talk. I said, take control. It's part of your mind. He takes control. And I says, what'd you do? And he says, I yanked his penis off. It's true. And I said, okay, now what? Ask him what he wants. Love him. Let him know. And this is essential. You have to learn this. That when you get into these ego states, they're part of your mind and they're teaching you something. Every mishap that you've had in your life is probably because of these things, and they taught you something, haven't they? Some of your worst lessons have come out of you, some of your best lessons have come out of you, some of your worst experiences. So there's a process by which the mind actually transforms itself from a negative force to a positive force. And if you can get to the ego states involved, you can help accelerate that process. So here we are, we're talking to this little dwarf, and what does he want? Well, he wants the fullness of his love to be there in his life. We finally find that out from this little thing. So he makes him into a new image. And we actually matured this image up, and his mind did this. We matured it up. He became a new image. He became a wonderful corporate executive that was orchestrating a complete program for total love. Do you know that all of his sexual abuse and molestation feelings left immediately? 2 weeks later, he came back for a check-in. I said, what's happening? He says, I don't know, I'm getting nervous. No feelings at all. Played with the children, the whole thing. He said, I'm getting nervous. I said, let's take another look. He goes down. His corporate executive has now got his tie undone, his shoes off, he's got his feet up on the desk, and the office is a mess. I said, how come? He said, there's something in the file I can't deal with. So we go over to the file, he's going along, and all of a sudden, ah, again, you know, the whole thing again. I said, what is it? And he says, it's the devil himself. Great big red hairy beast with horns and all this, you know. So what does he want? He's filed under M. What does that stand for? Masturbation. Oh, what does that mean? Well, it's devilish to do it. See, he'd been taught these beliefs, and there's a whole thing going on inside of it. We matured that up. Do you know that it's been 8 years now? I followed that case. He's never had a reoccurrence of his problem. 2 treatments took about 2 hours total. Because we accessed it directly, we matured it up systematically according to the maturation levels. And see, this is a natural maturation process. Everybody goes through it as an individual, but guess what? Your ego states go through them as individuals also. And so those parts of your mind which have been causing problematic behavior need to be accessed, and you can get rid of the problematic behavior by maturing it. So that's the process we're talking about here, okay? I didn't dare tell anybody this. I wanted to see if it really worked, so I tested it for 10 years on every kind of case that I could think of, and the end result is we had like 96% of the people who came for divorce, they had filed for divorce, sorry. They had filed for divorce and came for consultation on how to separate, stayed happily married when we got their ego states matured up. Problematic kids, I could go on 164 homosexuals. The first 164 we put through, every single one of them came out of their homosexuality. I mean, this thing got so dynamic I could not stay in the research project. I had to come out and start teaching it.
A hand for a great teacher, Dr. Vernon Wolfe.